Robert and Martha had built a quiet life together. They lived in a small, sturdy house on the edge of a town where everyone knew your name, or at least your family name. Their days were filled with simple routines: coffee on the porch in the morning, tending their small vegetable patch, afternoons reading in their armchairs, evenings watching the news. They had never had children of their own, a quiet sorrow they carried with dignity, finding joy in their nieces and nephews, and the comfortable rhythm of their shared existence. Robert, a retired carpenter with hands still strong from years of working with wood, was the steady beam, while Martha, with her gentle eyes and knack for baking the best apple pies in the county, was the warm hearth. Life, however, has a way of disrupting the quietest patterns. It was a cold Tuesday evening in late autumn when the phone call came. The voice on the other end was the local sheriff, a man Robert had known for years. His tone was somber, hesitant. There had been an accident, a terrible one, out on the interstate, slick with unexpected ice. Robert's sister, his only sibling, and her husband. Gone. Just gone. The world tilted on its axis for Robert and Martha. Grief, a tsunami, washed over them. Robert felt a part of his own history ripped away. Martha, though not bound by blood, had loved Sarah, Robert's sister, like the sister she never had. The shock was immense, the sorrow a heavy cloak. But amidst the devastation, there was a flicker of light, a heartbreaking responsibility. Sarah and her husband had a daughter, a quiet, wide-eyed girl named Elizabeth, just 4 years old. She had been in the car, miraculously surviving with only minor injuries, more shaken than hurt. The question of Elizabeth's future hung heavy in the air. There were no other close relatives capable or willing to take her in. Social services had called. They were looking for a temporary placement, somewhere familiar if possible, until a more permanent solution could be found. Robert and Martha looked at each other, their faces etched with grief and uncertainty. They were in their late 60s, raising a 4-year-old. The thought was terrifying. They had no experience with full-time parenting. Their home, while comfortable for two adults, wasn't set up for a child. Their routines, their peace, would all be gone. Robert thought of his quiet workshop, Martha of her uninterrupted afternoons with her books. It felt selfish, but the fear was real. Were they too old? Could they do this? Yet the image of little Elizabeth, orphaned and alone in the world, tugged at their hearts. She was family, Sarah's daughter, a piece of the sister he had just lost. Martha's maternal instincts, dormant for decades, stirred. "Robert," she said softly, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes, "we can't let her go to strangers. Not if we can help it. We have to try." Robert knew she was right. It wouldn't be easy. It might turn their lives upside down. But love, even the potential for it, was a powerful force. "Okay, Martha," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "We'll try. We'll bring her home." Bringing Elizabeth into their home was like introducing a vibrant, unpredictable force into a carefully ordered system. She was withdrawn at first, clinging to Martha, her little face pale and shadowed with sorrow she couldn't express in words. Nightmares woke her cries echoing in the quiet house. Robert, used to silence, found himself awake at odd hours, listening, a new kind of worry settling in his chest. They had to child-proof the house, adjust their schedules, learn about school applications and parent-teacher meetings. Money was tighter than they were used to. Children, even quiet ones, cost money. Robert took on a few small carpentry jobs, working longer hours than he had planned in retirement. Martha spent her afternoons volunteering at Elizabeth's school, helping in the library, just to be close, to make sure she was settling in. Slowly, gradually, Elizabeth began to blossom. Her laughter, tentative at first, became more frequent. She started asking questions, filling the quiet spaces with her bright curiosity. She loved helping Martha in the kitchen, her small hands covered in flour, her face smeared with berry juice. She adored Robert's workshop, fascinated by the sawdust and the tools, carefully handing him screws or fetching lengths of wood. She found comfort in their steady presence, their unwavering love. Robert and Martha, in turn, found their lives transformed in unexpected ways. Elizabeth's energy was infectious. Her simple joys, a perfectly formed snowflake, a ladybug on a leaf, a story read aloud, reminded them of the beauty in the world that grief had temporarily obscured. They discovered reserves of patience and energy they didn't know they possessed. The house, once just a comfortable dwelling, felt more like a home, filled with Elizabeth's drawings taped to the refrigerator and tiny shoes by the back door. They loved her fiercely, completely. She was their daughter in every way that mattered. As Elizabeth grew, however, the challenges shifted. The quiet, sad child of 4 became a lively, opinionated teenager. The world outside their small town beckoned. Friends, music, independence, these became her focus. The trauma of her early years, buried deep, sometimes manifested as a restless energy, a need to push boundaries. She started coming home late, her grades slipped, and conversations turned into arguments. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about her curfew, Elizabeth lashed out, her voice sharp with youthful frustration. "You don't understand anything," she cried, tears of anger and something else blurring her eyes. "You're not my parents. You don't know what it's like." The words, raw and hurtful, struck Robert and Martha like a physical blow. Martha gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Robert stood frozen, the blood draining from his face. They knew she didn't truly mean it, not the deep, loving part of her heart. But the pain of those words, touching the raw wound of their childlessness and the immense sacrifice they had made, was profound. Elizabeth, seeing their reaction, perhaps realizing the cruelty of her words, turned and ran from the room, slamming the front door behind her. That night, the silence in the house was thick with unspoken pain. Robert and Martha sat in their living room, the comfortable space suddenly feeling vast and empty. "She didn't mean it, Robert," Martha whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I know," Robert said, his voice hoarse. But the words, "You're not my parents," echoed in his mind. It was true, technically. They weren't her biological parents. And in that moment, it felt like every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every worry had culminated in that stark, painful truth. The tension lingered. Elizabeth was sullen and withdrawn for a few days. Then the arguments resumed. The gap between their quiet, traditional world and her restless, modern one seemed to widen daily. They tried to reach her, to talk, to understand, but she seemed determined to push them away, to assert her independence, even if it meant hurting them and herself. Then one morning, they woke to a silence that was different, too quiet, the kind of quiet that prickles the skin and sets the heart pounding. Elizabeth's room was empty, her bed neatly made, almost unnervingly so. On her pillow lay a folded piece of paper. "Robert and Martha," the note read, her teenage handwriting shaky but clear. "I need to find my own way. I can't do this anymore. Don't worry about me. I'll be okay. Thank you for everything." Gone, just like her parents. The loss was devastating, yet different. Not the shock of sudden death, but the slow, agonizing pain of rejection, of a love that felt unreturned, a lifetime of care seemingly cast aside. Robert and Martha were heartbroken, lost. They called the police, but Elizabeth was 17, almost a legal adult. She had left a note. There wasn't much they could do, they explained gently, unless she was in danger. They promised to keep an eye out, to contact them if she turned up. The house felt empty again, the silence returning, heavier now, filled with the ghost of Elizabeth's laughter and the ache of her absence. Robert retreated to his workshop, losing himself in the methodical work of shaping wood, trying to carve away the pain. Martha went through the motions of her days, her baking losing its joy, her smile a little dimmer. The years that followed were quiet, marked by the changing seasons and the lingering sadness that clung to the corners of their home. They never stopped hoping, searching, praying for a sign, a phone call, a letter, anything that would let them know Elizabeth was safe, that she hadn't completely forgotten them. More years passed. Elizabeth was a woman now, somewhere out in the world. They were in their late 70s, their steps a little slower, their hair silvered. The hope of finding her had become a quiet ember, still glowing, but no longer a raging fire. One crisp autumn evening, just as the first stars were appearing in the twilight sky, A sound broke the quiet of their street, a soft, insistent cry. It seemed to be coming from their front porch. Robert and Martha looked at each other, puzzled. A cat, maybe? But it sounded different, more human. Cautiously, Robert went to the front door and opened it. He peered out into the dim light. There, nestled in a woven basket placed carefully on their doormat, was a baby, a tiny girl swaddled in a faded pink blanket, crying softly, her face screwed up in distress. Robert stood frozen, speechless. Martha, coming up behind him, gasped, her eyes wide with shock, fixed on the baby. Without a second thought, her maternal instinct flaring to life once more, she reached down and gently lifted the basket. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured, her voice filled with tenderness. They brought the baby inside into the warmth of their kitchen. She quieted slightly in Martha's arms, her big blue eyes so familiar in shape looking up at them. She looked no more than a few months old. "Robert," Martha said, her voice trembling slightly, "we have to call someone. The police. She's been abandoned." Robert nodded, his mind reeling. Abandoned. On their doorstep. Why here? Why them? At their age? The fear returned. The same fear he'd felt when faced with raising Elizabeth, amplified tenfold. Could they possibly take on this again? But Martha was already rocking the baby, her heart melting. "We'll call, of course," she said, looking down at the tiny face. "But look at her, Robert. She needs someone right now. We can't just hand her over to strangers." They called the police. An officer came, kind but formal. He took down the details, looked around, asked questions they couldn't answer. He said they would take the baby to the local hospital to be checked over, and then social services would be involved. As he spoke, the baby, now calm, reached a tiny hand out and grasped Martha's finger. Martha's eyes met Robert's over the baby's head. In that moment, a silent decision was made. "Officer," Martha said, her voice steady, Could we keep her for now? Just until things are sorted. We have a comfortable home. We can look after her." The officer looked at them, two older people with kind faces, Martha cradling the baby protectively. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Social services will need to be involved immediately, of course. But for tonight, yes, keep her warm. I'll leave you the social worker's number. They'll be in touch first thing tomorrow." The next morning was a whirlwind. Social services visited, assessing their home, asking about their health, their finances, their history. Robert and Martha answered honestly, talking about Elizabeth, the heartbreak of her leaving, their quiet life. They didn't hide their age, their concerns, but they also expressed, with quiet conviction, their desire to care for this baby. They named her Lily. Lily brought a fragile, unexpected joy back into their lives. The house filled with the sound of her coos, her gurgles, her small, happy cries. Robert built a sturdy wooden crib in his workshop, his hands finding comfort in the familiar work, his heart finding comfort in creating something for this tiny life. Martha rediscovered the joy of knitting tiny booties and hats, her needles clicking late into the evening. Lily was a demanding but utterly lovable addition to their world. They were tired, yes, but it was a good kind of tired. A tired that came from purpose and love. Social services continued their assessment. It was a long, sometimes stressful process. There were background checks, interviews, forms to fill out. But the social worker, a kind young woman named Sarah, the irony wasn't lost on them, saw the genuine love Robert and Martha had for Lily, the stability of their home, the deep well of compassion in their hearts. When Lily was about a year old, the unexpected news came. They were officially granted custody, not temporary care, but legal guardianship. Lily was theirs. Their hearts swelled with a mix of profound relief, joy, and a quiet awe at the turn their lives had taken. Lily was now 10 years old, a bright, cheerful girl with a skip in her step and a contagious giggle. Robert and Martha, now well into their 80s, adored her. She filled their lives with light and laughter. She loved hearing stories about the past, though they kept the difficult parts. The story of Elizabeth's departure, carefully hidden. They told her about her biological parents, only that they had passed away, and that they, Robert and Martha, had been asked to care for her. They didn't want to burden her with the truth of her arrival just yet. One crisp autumn afternoon, the air smelling of wood smoke and damp leaves, Robert was working in his workshop. Martha was inside teaching Lily a new knitting stitch. Suddenly, Robert felt dizzy. His vision blurred, and a strange weakness spread through his limbs. He stumbled, dropping the piece of wood he was holding. The last thing he remembered was hitting the floor, the smell of sawdust filling his nose. He woke up in a hospital bed, the sterile white of the room a stark contrast to the warm wood of his workshop. Martha was sitting beside him, her face etched with worry, holding his hand tightly. "Robert? Oh, Robert, thank God," she whispered, relief washing over her face. He was weak, confused. The doctor came in, a kind, tired-looking woman. She explained he'd had a fall, likely a small stroke. He needed to rest, recover. Later, when Martha was helping him sip some water, he looked at her, his eyes clear now, filled with a deep love and a quiet urgency. "Martha," he whispered, his voice raspy, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you years ago." Martha leaned closer, her heart pounding. "What is it, Robert? Don't strain yourself." "Lily," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "When we found her in the basket," he paused, taking a shaky breath. "There was a note, tucked in the blanket. I found it after you took her inside." Martha frowned. "A note?" He had never mentioned a note. I I kept it," Robert confessed, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't know what to do. I was scared. After Elizabeth, leaving like that, I couldn't. I wasn't ready to face anything else. Especially this." "What did the note say, Robert?" Martha asked, her voice barely a whisper. Robert reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It was from Elizabeth. Our Elizabeth. She wrote that she couldn't care for the baby, that she knew we would, that she trusted us. She said Lily was her daughter." Martha felt the world spin. Lily, their precious Lily, was Elizabeth's daughter. Her heart ached with a complex mix of shock, sorrow for the life Elizabeth must have lived, and a profound, bone-deep understanding. Our Elizabeth. She had needed help, had come back to the only home she knew, the only people she could trust with her child. Tears streamed down Martha's face. "Elizabeth's daughter. Oh, Robert." "I tried to find her," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "After I read the note, I hired a private investigator even. Quietly. I wanted to tell you, Martha, I really did. But I was so afraid of upsetting you, afraid of losing you too, maybe, or just afraid of the pain, of knowing what she'd been through. And if we found her, what then? How would we explain it all to Lily? It felt too complicated, too much. It was easier, or I thought it was, just to keep the secret, just to love Lily and protect you from the pain." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for understanding. "It was foolish, I know, wrong, but I was just so scared, Martha, so very scared." Martha held his hand, her tears still falling, but her heart softening. She saw not a deceitful husband, but a man who had been burdened by grief and fear, trying in his flawed human way to protect the people he loved most in the world. He had made a mistake, a big one, born of pain and the very love that bound them. "Oh, Robert," she said, her voice full of compassion. "My dear, dear Robert." She squeezed his hand back. "Why didn't you tell me? We could have faced it together." "I know," he whispered. "I know I should have. I was wrong." "Well," Martha said, taking a deep breath, her gaze steady, "the secret is out now, and Lily is ours. She is Elizabeth's daughter, yes, but she is our Lily, and we love her. That hasn't changed." A profound sense of relief washed over Robert. He hadn't lost her trust, her love. Not completely. "The note, I put it in my toolbox," he mumbled, suddenly remembering. "Bottom drawer, under the sawhorse plans." Martha smiled gently. "I'll find it." In the days and weeks that followed, as Robert slowly recovered, Martha wrestled with the implications of the revelation. Their Lily was their granddaughter, the daughter of the girl who had broken their hearts by leaving. The circle of life and love and pain was more intertwined than she could have ever imagined. They decided together that they would tell Lily the truth when she was older, when she could understand. They would do it with love, explaining about her mother, about the difficult choices people sometimes have to make, about the enduring power of family in all its complicated forms. Martha found Elizabeth's note in Robert's toolbox. It was faded, the paper soft with age, but the words were clear, filled with a desperate hope and a mother's love. She kept it in a safe place, a tangible link to the daughter they had lost and the granddaughter they had found. Robert returned home, weaker but with a lighter heart. The secret, the weight he had carried for years, was gone. Their life, already full with Lily's presence, felt even more complete, grounded in a shared truth, however painful its origins. They were older, yes, their energy finite, but their love for each other, for Lily, and even for the absent Elizabeth, felt infinite. They continued their quiet life, filled now with the knowledge of Lily's lineage, but also with the deep comfort of their family unit. They were her grandparents, her parents, her guardians, her safe harbor. They were Lily's and she was theirs. And in the quiet evenings, sitting by the fire with Lily curled up between them, listening to her chatter about school, Robert and Martha knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that love, in its many forms, endures. It finds a way to bloom even in the harshest conditions, to connect souls across time and distance, and to heal the deepest wounds. They had faced loss, secrecy, and fear, but through it all, their love for each other and for the children, life had sent their way, had guided them, bringing them to a place of peace, acceptance, and a profound, quiet joy. Their family was unconventional, perhaps, but it was theirs, woven together by threads of love, sacrifice, and the enduring hope that tomorrow would bring another day together, one colorful, precious day at a time.